Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, June 29th, 2015. We're almost to the end of the month. 4th of July holiday or false flag coming up this weekend. We have, obviously, a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, do you remember how over the last several years I have talked about something called the 11th marble as a way of illustrating a critical flaw in the design of the private central banking model? Well, that 11th marble is returning to planet Earth, and it has grown to the size of the rock that killed off all the dinosaurs. As you're already aware by now, the banks in Greece are now closed along with their stock market. They're in the middle of an economic collapse. They're calling it a bank holiday to make it sound like it's a positive thing, but it really isn't. Everybody's trying to pretend that this is confined to Greece. No, it isn't either. And they've imposed capital controls. If you can find an open bank or an ATM that is not out of money, you are limited to 60 euros per day withdrawal. Now, the European banks outside of Greece have dumped 56 billion in losses. And they're all scrambling to cover that up. Last week we were talking about a banking insider who'd shared with me that everybody's basically in a panic right now. Despite all the happy talk on TV about it's all isolated, it really isn't. Now, the Dow closed more than 300 points down, and that's just on what I would call the pre-panic, because nothing has actually happened yet. Greece does not officially default to the IMF until tomorrow. And that's when things are going to get really, really very intense. All over the world, the euro has been plunging against other currencies, including the U.S. dollar. Asian markets were getting hammered. And as you heard on the SRN news break, the ratings agencies are out there saying Greece is junk. It's junk plus. It's junk double plus. They're having to make up new names of ratings to describe how bad the situation is over there. And we are still hearing in the American corporate media. We're still hearing in the American corporate media how really the U.S. exposure isn't all that much. People don't have a lot of money in the Greek banks. What they are not talking about are the credit default swaps, the derivatives that all hinge on Greece's default and possible exit from the Eurozone. That's the big, ugly monster hiding in the basement nobody wants to talk about right now. Now, the Greek banks are going to stay closed until the end of the week. British tourists are being warned. If they don't have cash in their pocket right now, the ATM machines can shut off at any second. Most of them ran out of money over the weekend, despite the limitations. Now, Greece is trying to accommodate foreign tourists and say that they are not bound by the 60 euro per day limit, but that means the tourists have to go through the process of identifying themselves to the bank somehow as not being Greek citizens. Everybody's hoarding groceries and gas. Nobody can get cash. I'm sure they're going to be bartering. There was one story over the weekend that the Greek government has started printing drachma notes in anticipation of dropping the euro. They want to have the new ink and paper on hand to replace the old ink and paper when things really go bad. Now, Greece will open 700 banks on Thursday, but only for people who are needing to draw from a pension fund. Because these people are more fragile than most. They're dependent on those pension funds. They don't have other sources to pay their bills, so they're going to be allowed to get their money out. But because the ratings agencies are lowering Greece's ratings even more, the interest on their current debt goes up again. Now, Greece has halted all foreign transfers. This is going to be a problem. The Bank of Macedonia wanted to get their funds out of the Greek bank. I don't know if they did or not, but I got several emails from people around the world who have friends in Greece, and they're unable to access any of their accounts. It's just all shut down. And look how fast it happened. When it happens here, it will happen just as quickly. And again, we keep telling all of our listeners, you should have no more money in the bank than you need to cover your immediate obligations. Because look at all these people in Greece who got stuck. They trusted the banks with their money. The banks are keeping the money. The Greek 10-year bond has collapsed. The yield is over 15%. Good for the investors, bad for the government, bad for the Greek taxpayer. And all of a sudden the ECB is waking up to a Monday morning headache of epic proportions. The European Central Bank exposure to the Greek banks is estimated at 126 billion euros. If they have to just let it go away, the entire ECB capital buffer would be wiped out, leaving the European Central Bank with negative equity, technically insolvent. So they're already out there saying, oh, we need more cash. We have to take more money away from the European citizens, to cover these losses here because we meant well. And we've got to prop up that 11th marble any way that we can. Last week they were actually talking about dumping the losses from Greece's collapse on the American taxpayer. Last report I heard is that idea was a non-starter, mostly because we don't have anything to throw into the till. Meanwhile, the European Union chief is still playing politics. He's out there. Jean-Claude Juncker is saying he feels betrayed by Alexis Tsipras. He feels very betrayed that Greece wouldn't do as they were told to do. He feels he's personally wounded that Greece might actually want to leave the European Union, so let's all feel bad for poor little Juncker. His feelings have been hurt. Now, on the other side, of course, Tsipras is absolutely furious with the Eurocrats for deliberately cutting the money lines and crashing their banking system as a form of pressure to get Tsipras to cave in and go back to the old deal. And he's not going for it. And Greece is in trouble. They may not even actually have enough money to conduct the coming referendum. They may have to do it the old-fashioned way, just get a crowd of people together and do a count of hands. But I'm sure that referendum is going ahead one way or the other. And there's a good thing about getting all the people in a precinct together for a show of hands. It's very, very hard for those Scottish vote riggers to come on in and change the numbers. Greece is, even up to this point, Greece was dealing with 26% unemployment that they would admit to. And look how our own government is rigging the numbers. 30% of their population living below the poverty line. 17% can't feed their family at all. 3.1 million Greek people have no health coverage whatsoever. Well, we'll just sign them up for Obamacare. Article out of The Independent. A Grexit would be a disaster, could signal the disintegration of the euro, because we're already hearing from other countries like France and Austria. They've had it with this European Union. They've had it with being plundered and pillaged by the money junkies. Enough. And the good news is, the general population isn't buying the propaganda that those Greek people are lazy and they don't want to work and they don't want to pay their bills. And public anger is definitely directed at the Troika. Everybody is coming to understand it is private central banks and private central bankers that have created hunger and hardship and poverty and war all across the globe. The secret is out. We know who the bad guys are. Another little article over in LaRouche Pack saying that we are all Greeks now, and the only chance that Europe has is to de-link from the American financial system and turn to the new Silk Road. Because they've got trade goods. They want to buy what Europe is selling. They've got things to sell Europe wants to buy. Peace through commerce. Everybody's making deals except the United States because all they know how to do is make war. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with a phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And over the break, Fox News is pushing the new booga booga of the day. The Department of Homeland Insecurity and the Federal Bureau of Idiots are out there screaming, there's going to be a terror attack on July 4th. Pay no attention to the Greek economy. That's not a problem. Pay no attention to all these efforts to start World War III. Just be afraid of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They're coming to get you. They're hiding in your box of sparklers. All right, we're going to start grabbing some phone calls here. Andrew in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
I learned about like the Iceland, how like over like 90% of their debt was like created through fraud.
Yes.
And like it was created by the bankers, and like the people didn't do this. I think isn't the same thing with Greece?
Well, yeah, that comes into the heading of odious debts, and it wasn't 90% in Iceland, but it was a significant part of the total debt. Iceland just wrote it off, said it doesn't exist. It was a made-up debt. It's a fantasy, and we're not going to believe in it. We're not going to obey it. And they simply wrote it off, and they started throwing their crooked bankers in prison. And Iceland has recovered from 2008 a lot faster than any other nation, which is why you don't hear about Iceland in the corporate media a lot these days. And Greece's attitude is exactly the same. At least half of their debt was created through outright fraud between Goldman Sachs and Papandreou. And the people of Greece are saying, why should we pay for that? Common sense says they shouldn't be responsible for it. Of course, Christine Lagarde, the head of the IMF, who gets $1 million a year salary tax-free, is out there saying, debt is sacrosanct, debt is holy, you will bow down and worship the debt, and you will sacrifice your grandchildren's future to pay that debt.
But they've been holiday in Greece. Aren't people now going to start taking out their money out of the bank, and like it's going to create like a financial panic?
Well, it's already happening. I mean, the people of Greece have been doing what's called a slow bank run for months now, just taking out a little bit, taking it home, not trying to get a panic going. But now, with the capital controls in place and the banks are closed for this entire week, the instant they reopen, people are going to be emptying out their accounts. And, well, they should, because when your money is in their bank, they can grab it whenever they want. All of the nations around the West that are trapped with these private central banks, they've already changed the laws to make it legal, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, for the banks to rob you. Because the easiest way to rob a bank is to be the owner of the bank, and that's exactly what's going on.
I wouldn't be surprised if what happened to Andrew Jackson, how like the central bank tried to assassinate him. What would happen to the Greece Prime Minister? Yeah,
a lot of people were worried about that. I actually had a small bet with somebody about whether or not such an assassination attempt would occur by this morning, and I said I wasn't sure it would happen over the weekend, but it could. There could be an attempt at a coup d'etat. We do know that there's one opposition figure within Greece's government who's pro-bank, pro-slavery to the ECB, and he may all of a sudden find a lot of funding and support showing up to try and force Tsipras from power.
Also, I feel like they might stage a big terror attack so people could focus on ISIS and not care about the Greek crisis or any other things.
Well, that'll work for the rest of the world. That'll work here in the United States of America. For the people of Greece, I mean, they are mired in this economic mess. There isn't going to be anything that happens with ISIS anywhere that's going to take their minds off of how badly they have been screwed over by the IMF and the ECB.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Errol in the Netherlands. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Aloha. How are you?
I'm fine.
Okay. Am I clear?
Yes, you're very clear. You're very clear. The phone systems in the Netherlands are a lot better than they are here in the United States.
That's a fact. Yeah. Many people don't talk about the EMS, that is the European, not EMS, I spell it wrong. But that doesn't matter.
The ECB, I think, is what you're trying to talk about.
No. It's European Stabilization Mechanism.
Okay.
ESM, it's
yes.
called. And, what many people don't understand is we got a problem now in the Ukraine, and Mr. Putin has said, okay, we're going to route that pipeline through Turkey, and then eventually it will go to Greece.
Yes.
So, the interesting fact is that NATO has, and in NATO is, I think, I live in the Netherlands, but I think personally, that's my personal opinion, I think NATO is an illegal military system. Because
well, it's certainly an obsolete one because it was created during the Cold War to protect Europe against the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union is gone, and the only way NATO can go on getting all that money from all those countries is to make Russia the new enemy. Oh, yes, we were all set to shut down and sell all the weapons and let the people of the world spend their money on peaceful things, but now we've got a new enemy. You've got to go on giving us money and weapons and your children.
Mm-hmm. And what I just want to say about that is NATO has offered Greece to, when there is going to be problems in Greece, just like we have now, with the banking and everything, maybe there will be other things. But I just looked, I also have German language. I know German language, so I look also at the German language TV stations, and what I see in there is that they are really panicking.
Yes,
and that's very good. That's very interesting. And the fact is that the pipeline is going to Greece, to Europe, from Turkey to Greece, and then into Europe, and that's why NATO wants to. And NATO, what you said it before, eventually NATO is America, is the USA.
Yeah, it's dominated by the United States. It always has been.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a very good point. So that is what I want to make clear to the public, so that they understand the geopolitical concept of where we are in now. And where I see this going, and one of the organizationers that has created the Tsipras Party has also talked in the German TV show. He said, we don't, and this is very important, we don't want to get out of Europe. We want to lose the euro. And that is what many people, that is how they twist it. They say, we want to... Okay,
Errol, I'm sorry to cut you off. We have to take a break for commercials. I'll respond to your comments when we come back. Thank you very much for the phone call. We'll be right back. I forgot to put up the volume on that mixer here. Too many buttons, too many switches here. All right, so what we're seeing right now, and this gets back to what I said before about how banking isn't really a science, it's a religion. And it relies on your belief to function and be profitable for the most holy private central bankers in their palaces across the land. And they're still relying on your trust and faith and belief to keep the system going, even as they prepare to just basically loot the planet. And you heard it on the SRN Newsbreak. The things in Greece, it's not going to affect America. Our exposure's very, very limited. Article over in Finance on Yahoo, will distance from Greece save the U.S. markets? Another one here, Everything Finance blog, the Greek financial crisis won't hurt the U.S. And if you believe that one, I have some of Saddam's nuclear weapons to sell you, because what nobody wants to talk about are the derivatives. The credit default swaps. Those are the problem. They can either pay them and bankrupt the banking system, or they can refuse to pay them and collapse the derivatives market as a whole. That's basically the choices they have. Now, apparently over in Great Britain, members of the Parliament, trade unionists, economists are all calling on David Cameron to support the idea of simply canceling Greece's debt, saying that the losses could be covered by seizing capital from speculators and banks that were the beneficiaries of Athens' troubles. Yeah, I can see that one moving forward quite a bit. These money junkies worked hard, or had other people work hard to take that money away from you. They're not going to give it back. Remember, money junkies are psychologically ill. They can't see the world beyond their need for more of that ink and paper to roll around on in the middle of their living room. And just like any other addict, They will take themselves and their families and their community into utter destruction before they will face up to the fact that they are addicts. Now, we're going to take another phone call here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yep. Hi, Mike. Greece, basically they need to leave the system just like a regular person needs to get money out of the savings account, get some gold and silver, and hunker down. I mean, it's going to hurt Greece, but they got to look east, and they got to look quick.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the fact is the European Union has been a disaster for everybody in Europe, just like the North American Union is a disaster for everybody in this country. It's all about creating larger and larger human ranches from which work, product, and wealth may be harvested, by the ranchers, the money junkies. And it really is a very raw deal. I'm looking on Fox News right now where apparently all of our candidates here are out pointing to what's going on in Greece saying, this is why we must get our debt problem under control. And there's the biggest of the big lies. You cannot get debt under control when you have a privately owned central bank issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest. Because by design, this system creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt, and the debt grows and grows and grows as the wealth of the bankers grows and grows until the system is so out of balance it collapses. That's what's happening in Greece. The contagion will spread because of the wonder of economic globalism. All the safety barriers that would have kept Greece isolated are no longer in place. They're not going to be able to contain it. And I think tomorrow when Greece officially defaults on the IMF, things are going to get really, really ugly. We're going to see the printing presses and the computers all over the globe just pouring out trillions and trillions of instantly created money to try and make the ledgers look like they're okay, with the net result that the entire planet is going to succumb to Weimar-style hyperinflation. Forget Weimar. Zimbabwe. We're going to be walking around with 100 trillion euro and dollar notes in our pocket, and we'll take a box of those to buy a loaf of bread.
And you know who got a lot of the derivatives is Deutsche Bank. Boy, they're in trouble.
Were they selling them or buying them? The people who bought them, their problem is getting the sellers to make good on those swaps. And unfortunately, at least here in the United States of America, whether a true default has happened or not is up to a committee that is made up of representatives of all the Wall Street firms who sold those swaps. And what we're hearing out of Wall Street is they're just going to say, no, this isn't really a default. Greece is just refusing to pay back their money. It's not a real default. And they're going to stick everybody who bought those derivatives. But if they do that, it'll collapse the derivatives market. There's no easy way out of any of this. The fastest way, the fastest way out of, my show.
Yes, I'm sorry.
The fastest way out of this to restore the economy is you got to start shutting down those private central banks. You have to have the courage to do what the U.S. Congress and Andrew Jackson did in the early years of this country. Realize the bankers are in business for themselves at the expense of the rest of the nation and just shut them down. And it's going to have to happen all over the globe. If you give any one of these bankers the legal authority to create credit or money out of thin air, and they'll start the game all over again.
Sorry about that. Hey, Mike, about the previous caller mentioned about NATO is a strong arm for the UK and the US.
Yes.
They basically, and part of it's all connected. IMF, World Bank, NATO, just look what they did in Libya, Yugoslavia.
Yeah, NATO's basically the enforcer. You will stay a slave to the private central bankers or we'll come in and make your country look like, well, Yemen or Ukraine.
Except they ain't going to be able to do that with Russia and China. Checkmate.
No, they're not going to be able to, and the world is really starting to pivot over to the Russian and Chinese-involved banking systems. It's only a matter of time. The only way I don't want to give them ideas, because I know they're listening to this show. The only way the United States is going to stop the world from dropping the dollar for the ruble and the yuan is to just go ahead and nuke Moscow and Beijing.
And nobody will have anything.
Yes.
That's the checkmate.
Yeah, but the money junkers will be standing there saying, I own this pile of radioactive rubble.
I was watching CNBC today while flipping through, and they said there's really nothing to worry about right now, and they kept saying it like over and over. You know,
you will believe
worried.
There is nothing to worry about. There is no. Well, the panic is on right now. Remember, I said we were in a race as far as our government and Wall Street were concerned. They needed a major war on which to blame the financial collapse, and they lost that race. The collapse is now here. It is at hand. And they're trying to find some way. I mean, they're out there bashing on Iran is reneging on the deal, and Russia's bad, and China's bad, and they're going to go on telling you the economy is fine, the economy is fine. Greece is not going to affect us, because they're really trying to find some way they can get a major global war going, so they got a scapegoat. It's not our fault the global economy is imploded. It's all the fault of Russia. It's all the fault of China. It's all the fault of Iran. You know, we're the good guys. They're the bad guys. You should hate them. And again, this is how the U.S. got out of the mess the last two times. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008. Here we are on the verge of a potentially global nuclear war.
Well, people need to realize and get ready. This is a global economy. Everything is interconnected. That's what people don't understand. I hear people who cares. Everything is interconnected. Well, that's why we get stuff made in China. You know, it's one big global economy, so if one bank fails over there, it's like AIG.
Look what happened in 2008. I mean, that was triggered by a Wall Street fraud, but because of economic globalism having taken down all the safeguards, the contagion from that spread all over Europe, all over Asia, and they're getting ready to do it again. We got to take a break for commercials. Dustin, thank you very much for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to our show here. And getting on back to the economy, and we will get to some other things later on in the show, but obviously this is the beginning of something major. It's a major event. Today, the Dow lost 350 points. It's the worst single-day point drop in the last 2 years, and this is the day before the actual default takes place. And what we have here is the thundering herd on the verge of panic, and all of the private central bankers just creating money out of thin air so that as fast as people sell the stock, they can buy it back to keep the market looking good. But it's all a big, gigantic fairy tale. Now, we have talked a lot of times about the rigging of certain market, well, the rigging of all the markets. Let's be honest, that's what's been going on here. And we know that a lot of these large multinational banks have been caught rigging LIBOR, rigging Forex, rigging the gold and silver fix. And somebody noticed something very odd today. The price of gold is not going up, reacting to the Greece crisis, and normally it would. They're still holding down the price of gold. They're still trying to figure some way they can manipulate the market to their own benefit and against yours. Somebody else is pointing out the continuing amazing hypocrisy of Germany, which is out there screaming that Greece must honor its debt, and yet Germany still owes Greece 11 billion euros in unpaid loans going back to World War II. In 1943, Germany forced the Bank of Greece to lend it 2 loans worth 11 billion euros in today's money. Germany will not pay back that debt. Apparently, Christine Lagarde's idea that all debt is sacrosanct does not extend to Angela Merkel. Now, the IMF is out there screaming financial crisis, financial crisis. The reality is, overall, they've already made money off of Greece. With all the loans and rolling credit and everything, they have made a 2.5 billion euro profit out of Greece. That's all private central banking is. It is a machine to take the real wealth of a nation and its people, put it in the pockets of the private central banks. That's what it's designed to do. That's why that's what it always does. And the end result is poverty for the masses, riches for the money junkies, and a government driven to wars of conquest to try and keep the books balanced just a little bit longer, which is where we are in Washington, D.C. Now, there's a story over in Zero Hedge saying the next round of the Great Crisis has just begun. This is only the beginning. There is no recovery. They've been lying about that all along. They're lying about the true scale of unemployment in this country. There is a huge bond bubble that they have been propping up. Greece is just the first domino to fall. And already we're starting to see some of the other dominoes wobble back and forth a little bit. As I mentioned earlier in the show, Macedonia is trying to get their deposits out of the Greek banks. Several Italian bank stocks were frozen in trading. They failed to open on the market today. They're exposed to Greece's debt. You're probably hearing all these articles about, oh, Greece, and that's the other side of the world. We don't need to worry. Well, it's already on this side of the planet. Down in Puerto Rico, their bonds are collapsing. Everyone's focused on the Confederate flag in this country. They're starting to pay attention to Greek ATM lines, the collapsing money junkie Ponzi schemes, European bank implosions. Puerto Rico is now in a death spiral, and their bonds are in collapse as of this morning. The Reserve Bank of India's governor issued a statement that the global economy is slipping into a repeat of the Great Global Depression of the 1930s. Personally, I think it's going to be a lot worse. Former Treasury official, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, is out there saying the West is beginning its collapse. We've seen this coming for a long time. We tried to shout the warning. But again, the money junkies are suffering a psychological illness. They are addicts. And like any other kind of addicts, alcohol addict, meth addict, heroin addict, cocaine addict, they can't see beyond their addiction to how their behavior is destructive to themselves and the community around them. The problem is, of course, with money addiction, you look like you're doing great. You're wearing the latest fashions from Bergdorf Goodman, like Hillary is right now. You got $1,000 a pair of shoes. You're driving in $1 million cars. You look like you're perfectly fine, but you're still an addict, and you don't see the long-term consequences of what you're doing. Now, the Bank of International Settlements, the private central banker's private central bank, the capo di tutti capi of all the money junkies in the world, they're out there saying in their conclusion, the world is not going to be able to fight the next global crash. And the reasoning is very simple. All these trillions and trillions of dollars and euros that we're told that we owe don't exist at all. They never did. That's the problem. That's the 11th marble I keep talking about. Private central banking is a 300-year-old scam perpetrated on the people of planet Earth by these private central bankers. All they got to do is come up with ink, paper, printing presses, and bribe the right members of the government, and the scam goes forward. And they have so much money and power, they have even started wars. They've assassinated presidents to keep their scam going. But it only worked as long as the people of the world didn't see that's what was going on. It only continues to work as long as people allow themselves to be brainwashed to believe that this is the way banking and the economy is supposed to work, and there are no other alternative systems. And yeah, there are. There's the system this country started with, of government-issued, debt-free currency, a unit of value. That's the only difference between a U.S.-issued dollar and a U.S.-issued treasury bond. One of them makes the people rich, the other one makes the bankers rich. And we're already starting to see a move by the bankers. The bankers are starting to turn on their subservient governments. The Bank of International Settlements is trying to put out the image. It is the wise voice of reason on how to deal with the coming crash. And you know what their advice is? That everything will be fine if you'll just let the private central banks run your country for you. This civil government is the reason everything is all messed up here. You should just, we'll keep them for ritual, traditional, vestigial purposes, but really your countries would be so much better off if you let the bankers run them as a business. Because if we run the world like a business, all will be well. No, it won't. What they're suggesting is fascism distilled, fascism refined to an intensity never seen before in history. And a lot of this is written into these secret treaties that Obama is out there pushing. The Trans-Pacific Partnership grants privately owned banks effectively governmental power. This is what TPP and TISA and TTIP are all about. Handing control of the civil society over to the money junkies. And we're looking at how well that's worked out. Right now in the United States of America, 1/4 of all Americans have to spend more than half their total income just to keep the roof over their head. It's completely out of control here. Another article over at the Daily Coin. Oh, the lies we are fed. And it's just important to understand you have been lied to. Whether it's the plunge protection team, the Wall Street ratings agencies, the government itself, the corporate media, the only way they can keep you obedient is to go on creating an illusion that everything's going to be just fine if you will just do as you're told, give the bankers all your wealth, give the government your children for wars of conquest, and all will be well. But look at the way they've been rigging the stock market to constantly go up so they can point at it and say, see, the economy is great, the Dow is up above 18,000. Not anymore. That's not natural. It's unsustainable. They were never going to be able to keep it going up like that, no matter how much instantly created money the Federal Reserve put in there. And we have created a dangerous level of overvaluation of the American stock market, greater than that of 1929. We got to take a break for the news, and we'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Now, interesting little article over at Investment Watch blog. Stupid selfies. Is the millennial generation screwed? Yeah, they are. And they didn't do it to themselves. Our generation did it to them. The money junkies did it to them. The federal government did it to them. And they're being told, don't worry about your quality of life or anything. Just make sure you have the latest branded sportswear and your little selfie stick to take pictures and put them out on Facebook to show everybody that you are a real accomplished human being. We're seeing a lot of the same bizarre social manifestations today that we saw back in the 1930s. During the Great Depression, where people were desperate for ways to feel good about themselves at a time when their sense of self-worth was being hammered by the employment situation, by the deterioration of the towns they lived in. And they went out and did things like dance marathons. Now we have selfie sticks. Anyway. Now, Angela Merkel is trying to cover all her bases and has indicated that following the Greek referendum and the possibility that Greece will likely leave the European Union, that Germany would still be interested in talking with them about commerce and business. You know, we're not going to say goodbye completely. It's not an either-or situation. So everybody's hedging their bets here. Now, over in China, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank had their ceremony for the signing of the initial members. They're now up and running. 57 countries signed on board. Japan and the United States, which oppose the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank because it's a threat to the Federal Reserve and the Bank of Japan, are not among them. But 57 countries are signing on board. And we're already hearing whining coming out. This is courtesy of an article over in Sputnik News where the U.S. and Japan are saying, 57? We didn't expect anywhere near that many people were going to sign on to this. How dare they not love the Federal Reserve and our Western-style banking? And they're already whining and crying that the world is turned against the U.S. dollar and those nations that are still running their economies in parallel with the dollar. Okay, let's see. Looks like we are getting a phone call just now coming online. I'm going to go ahead and take it, even though I don't know the topic. Robert in Germany, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How are you doing?
B. Gates.
Mike. B. Gates. Tremendous. Hey, I'm a long-term listener. You know me by another name on your site. I write a lot of bullshit. Anyway, the only thing I want to...
Please don't curse on this here radio. Over in Germany you can do that. No. Here in the U.S., they'll take away my microphone for that.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay.
Well, listen. Robert, you need to understand. The United States may be torturing innocent Iraqis to find weapons of mass destruction that don't exist and dropping white-hot flaming death on innocent children around the world, but we're not allowed to use bad words on the radio to show that we are a just and moral people.
No. Do you remember Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now?
Yes.
Anyway, okay, I wanted to ask you the following. Okay, say, for example, you would put yourself in place of the guys that have the 500 trillion, that own half the planet. What would you do with the rest of the people? What would you do with your cash? What would you do with all your power, whatever you have? How would you fix the whole situation?
Well,
would you behave differently than these?
By pumping it back down into the bottom of the economy. That's the only thing that can sustain it. And, I'm never going to be rich. Years and years ago, during my first marriage, I was sort of kind of well off, but, my ex got pretty much everything. She moved out of the house. She took everything except the dog in the kitchen. I think because she forgot we had the kitchen.
But they're done that. But the thing is, explain to me, okay, how would you behave? Where are you, these guys in, say, for example, the Bohemian Grove, whatever, how would you do, what would you do different than these idiots are doing right now, that planet would actually work, If you can explain it in layman's terms, maybe the people can understand what you ask their congressmen.
I think, again, the most important thing is we have to get away from using debt-based currencies. We need a public currency that's managed as a public utility. And if that means setting up a whole new economy and a whole new currency, it basically means the political system has to realize that they've been on this path to destruction all along. They're going to have to turn around and say, yeah, I think we made a mistake, and that's not a behavior we see in our government. Unfortunately, people who've got that kind of money, all they think about is a way to get more money. And they don't think in terms of what's good for civilization and humanity as a whole, because people who think like that generally don't get rich. Now, there are some exceptions, and this goes back to what I was saying. I don't hate rich people. People like James Cameron or Steve Jobs who make a good product and they get rich that way. These are people we should admire and emulate. It's all of these money junkies who've scammed the system, who've bought governments to enslave their populations to this private central banking scam. They are the common enemy of all mankind. Somehow they have to be shut down. Everywhere. We can't just take one out in one country, because as soon as you do, all the other countries enslaved to private central banks will make war on them. Think, Germany in the 1930s, Libya, Iraq, all of these countries that are trying to break free from private central banking, and what happens? All the world's nations enslaved to the private central banks find a reason to go in and make war.
Sure.
But if I were personally to, acquire some kind of a sizable fortune, I probably wouldn't hang on to it all that long. In a lot of ways, I look at J.K. Rowling, who just became insanely rich off the Harry Potter books. She's just given most of it away. She kept enough to keep herself comfortable, and she doesn't feel she needs any more than that. And I think that's really good. She's done a lot of really wonderful charitable work, trying to put that money back into circulation, because that's what's really paralyzing all of Europe, certainly Greece, here in the United States of America. So much money has been taken out of the system as a whole and piled up on top. There isn't enough currency to operate the system anymore. Everybody's waiting for somebody else to pay an outstanding invoice before they can move forward with any future business. And, of course, they're getting phone calls from the bank. Oh, don't wait for that invoice. We'll loan you the money at interest to move forward. But do you realize how much interest is applied not once, but over and over and over again during the normal course of business? You've got your credit line that you're buying your inventory with. That's paying interest. You charge it off to your customers as part of the cost of doing business. It's like hidden taxes. People don't realize how much of the cost of the goods they buy off a store shelf accounts for interest to all these credit lines and rotating banking financial scams all the way along. It's a huge, huge part of the price. If you took out the cost of banking interest and taxes from products, they'd be selling for like a fifth of what they do now.
Hardcore. Yeah, I was just dining with a person within Deutsche Bank, by the way, and I've told her of this situation a long time ago, and she kind of really believes me. I pointed her to your show, and she's a listener now.
Okay, good.
And, but I think it's all coming to a head somehow. But the thing is, you know, if you had all these trillions, you know, how would you actually act, you know, like overnight and say, okay, here is like, you know, I don't know.
I'd be shoving it back down to the bottom, you know, infrastructure investment, job creation, to get the economy going again, because if money doesn't move in that cycle, the economy locks up, and that's where we are right now. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. And by the way, if somebody wants to send me a few $1 trillion, I'm happy to demonstrate. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm looking on Fox News, and they're totally focused on the controversy over the Supreme Court ruling on gay marriage, and we shouldn't be modifying the Constitution. We have to focus on religious freedom, which is the freedom of religious people to impose their beliefs on everybody else. They're trying very, very hard. I mean, they did have to acknowledge what happened in Greece and what happened on the stock market. And now they've dropped it. They're back on Confederate flag and gay marriage and all this other stuff. They don't want you paying attention to what's going on in the global banking system, so that when the haircut happens here in the U.S., you're caught off guard just as badly as the people of Cyprus were. You're being conditized. All right, turning away from the economy, over in Yemen, Saudi warplanes have hit Yemen again. 15 civilians dead. The bombing is going on. Now, yesterday we were talking about Friday we were talking about how Saudi Arabia had responded to the United Nations call for humanitarian aid into Yemen by basically coming in and picking up almost the entire tab themselves. And a lot of people were looking on that askance as being a hypocritical thing for Saudi Arabia to do, because they're the ones that created the humanitarian crisis. But by providing most of the money, Saudi Arabia gets to dictate who does and does not get it. Now there's a huge scandal coming on out. This is being reported in INFOWARS News, that the medical supplies provided by Saudi Arabia to Yemen are all infected with HIV and hepatitis. And the Yemeni medical source, Dr. Hassam Karim, told INFOWARS News they're seeing people of Yemen are coming down with HIV and hepatitis after using the medications supplied by Saudi Arabia. And apparently the World Health Organization has also confirmed these medications were tainted with the AIDS virus. That's just tacky. Now, Turkey is getting ready to set up what they call a buffer zone on the Syrian border. They're sending tanks to the border saying, we need a buffer zone. It's a security issue. Really, you shouldn't be worried about it. It's just a buffer zone, which is an excuse they've picked up from their Israeli brethren, as it were. The reality is a little bit different. Over at antiwar.com, they're reporting on indications that Turkey is going to invade Syria to fight the Kurds. So that's all heating up. Everybody's in a rush to war because they need something to blame the economic implosion on. Because remember, people in government, you know, as a species, are incapable of accepting blame or responsibility when they mess up. It's always somebody else's fault or the will of the imaginary playmate in the sky. Because they're politicians. That's how they think. They take credit for everything good, dump the blame for everything bad on somebody else. That's how politics works. Now, Russia is promising economic and military aid to Syria, while the U.S. is once again going back to that tired, worn-out canard about Assad is using chemical weapons on his own people. If at first you don't succeed, lie again. And it's like the U.S. government is absolutely convinced that your brains have been so melted by the chemicals in your food or numbed by corporate media, or maybe you graduated Common Core, that you don't remember all the other times they tried the exact same lie. or that you don't remember that Saddam Hussein really did not have nuclear weapons of mass destruction. Now, the European Union has announced that they need to counter Russian propaganda regarding Ukraine. They're mounting a huge campaign to promote European values, which I don't think is going to work because people are going to look at what's going on in Europe right now, Greece, Spain, France, Italy, and say, I don't think the European values work because they're not doing very well over there. But what they're really talking about is the European Union is having to counter the fact that Russian media and the independent media, pretty much everybody else's media, is out there pointing out all the lies that they've been using to try and get this war going. It's nonsense. Now, over in global research up in Canada, they're talking about the U.S. government's absence of policy. And they're saying that the reason Washington is continuing this shrill, hysterical anti-Russia propaganda is they don't have a plan B. They're literally in a corner. If they can't provoke a major war with Russia or China within days and the economy implodes, we, the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union, are going to point the finger of blame for the crashing economy where it deserves to go. The private central bank, Wall Street corruption, and a complicit U.S. government. They're not going to be able to duck the blame unless they've got somebody they can scapegoat. Oh, it's not our fault. It's ISIS. It's Al-Qaeda. It's the space aliens in UFOs. It's Russia. It's China. It's the Australians. All those. Go hate them and leave us alone. It's the secret hidden Bilderberger whatever group that they're going to blame it on. Canada has introduced additional economic sanctions against Russia. Canada's economy, particularly its oil industry, has already suffered greatly from the sanctions. Russia has weathered them rather well. So, of course, let's go on and do some more of the same thing that didn't work out too well. Now, we have been talking about the rioting going on in Armenia, which was supposedly sparked by a 17% hike in the electric bill, something that normally doesn't trigger these kind of violent riots. Now, the president of Armenia has already said we're going to hold off on the rate hike. The rioters are saying we're going to riot anyway, which telegraphs this is another U.S. covert attempt at overthrow to get Armenia's government out, put in an obedient U.S. puppet. And as a matter of fact, I'm not the only person saying that, because over in TASS they're saying the riots in Armenia are designed to squeeze Russia out of the Caucasus region. So the world is picking up on just what it is the U.S. has been doing repeatedly since the end of World War II. And that approach to foreign policy, covert overthrow and installation of puppet regimes, only works when the people in that country don't realize that's what's going on. But that's not true anymore. Everybody around the world understands this is how the U.S. has been building its empire for the last half century. Whether it was Iran in 1953, Chile in 1973, the Philippines under Marcos, Cuba under Batista, on and on and on. And every time one of these countries kicks the puppet ruler out, oh, they hate us for our freedoms. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And let's see, nobody's waiting online here. Webster Tarpley just came out with an interesting comment. First of all, he also understands that the corporate financial media is out there trying to keep everybody calm. Yeah, there's a little thing over in Greece, and yeah, the Dow lost 350 points. It's no big deal. We'll rig it back up tomorrow. Let's talk about gay marriage, and let's talk about the Confederate flag and the world's ugliest dog contest. That's what Fox News is reporting right now this second, the world's ugliest dog contest. Boy, there's important stuff for you to know. But tomorrow is the actual technical default by Greece against the IMF. And in 3 weeks, Ukraine will default. There is no stopping this. What the money junkies want is for you to be relaxed and tranquil and calm and leave your money right where it is in the bank where they can grab it. under the recently changed laws that say savings account holders are unsecured investors in the bank. And, well, it just makes sense. If the bank is losing money, you, as unsecured investors, you have to take those losses. Because under fascism, the losses are always transferred onto the ordinary people. That's what makes fascism work. For the very short time fascism does work. Fascism always has a finite lifespan. The people who set it up don't care, because they get their money then and there, and future generations get to pay for the collapse. Now then, over in the Lugansk People's Republic, they're basically saying that along with all the ceasefire violations of the Minsk Agreement, Kiev has over 75,000 servicemen in the so-called conflict zone in Donbass, which under the Minsk Agreement, they were supposed to pull them back. Nope, they're still there. So let's talk about the P5+1. That is getting a lot of coverage. And we're already starting to see the propaganda out there for a last desperate measure to derail this thing. Now, Iranian sources are saying that the P5+1 in Iran have settled a framework for sanctions relief timing. It's the only outstanding issue they are saying. And they are saying that they are close enough to an agreement that they are going to extend the June 30th deadline over to probably July 9th. Now, already we are seeing on the American corporate media how Iran has backed off their commitment to allow inspections of non-nuclear military sites. Now, this goes back to the initial framework agreement. And Obama came out and he made a speech in which he said, Iran has agreed to this, and Iran has agreed to that, and Iran has agreed to that. And 24 hours later, Iran came out and said, no, that's not what we agreed to. That's not what's in the actual framework agreement. And when this happened, I predicted Obama was selling you a claim that Iran had agreed to something they had not, so that somewhere down the road they can say, oh, Iran has backtracked. They went back on their word. This is why we can't trust them. Because Iran never agreed to inspection of their non-nuclear military sites. They're agreeing to have the IAEA come in whenever they want. Whenever the IAEA feels they have a need to inspect a nuclear facility, Iran has said, come on in and welcome. But the non-nuclear military sites were never part of the agreement. That was a claim made by Obama to give himself an ace in the hole, to come out and say, well, Iran has violated their word. They're the ones who are untrustworthy. Sorry, Obama, we know that you're the one who cannot be trusted. Now, somebody apparently leaked a message from Obama to Iran expressing Obama's desire that this deal be completed as part of Obama's legacy for the future. And I wonder who would leak that. Well, who is it who's been spying on all the proceedings all along? Story out of Sputnik News. The U.S. needs a war every 4 years to maintain their economic growth. This is coming out of an expert in Belgium, and he's absolutely right. Because the U.S. needs a war to use up all the stockpiled war materials and say, oh, we need to gear our economy for more war. That's what the U.S. does. The U.S. is a warrior nation. They make things that kill people. The purpose of war is to grind up work products so the population is kept busy rebuilding what they had before. That's the whole purpose of war. Use up, destroy work product to not allow the people to build themselves a better lifestyle. To not approach a point where they could actually be a political threat to the money junkies. This is actually in George Orwell's Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism, the book within the book of 1984. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Mike, I just a couple of questions. One is, as far as the Ukraine goes, how would that really affect the EU, the ECB, and all that? Because they're not really a part of the EU, and they're really not. I don't think they're part of the EU.
Are you kidding? The ECB and the Fed and the IMF have been loaning Ukraine billions and billions of dollars to fund this war against the Eastern Ukrainian republics. And we were talking just a couple of weeks ago about the hypocrisy of the the IMF telling Greece, you will pay, you will pay, you will pay, and then turning around and telling Ukraine, we're going to give you more money even though you can't make the payments on what you owe now. And so, yeah, the exposure in Ukraine to the IMF and ECB is even larger than it is in Greece.
Oh, okay, I understand that. The other thing I want to ask you is, how long is Russia going to keep on putting up with this garbage? I was watching Russia Today earlier, where I went to work at called Crosstalk, and they were saying that they were discussing it. They were saying for Russia to actually military get involved now would be suicide. How are you going to say that? I think personally, with the army we got today, I think Russia would kick our butts all over the place.
Yeah, and that would result in the use of nuclear weapons. And
well, okay, nobody would win. That's suicidal for everybody.
Yeah, but again, look at our government. Look at our government unwilling to admit failure or error. When they get into this war with Russia and China, on the day they realize they cannot win it conventionally, they will resort to the nuclear weapons. We've even got people in the Pentagon saying, let's just go ahead and start this thing with nukes right now and get it over with. And they've all got their bunkers. The money junkies have got their bunkers, and the military have their bunkers. And if they do start a nuclear war, my suggestion is we find all these bunkers and cement over the hatches. Just leave them down there.
I mean, but Mike, even during a Cold War, I mean, these people weren't that crazy. I mean, even when in the Cuban Missile Crisis, thank God we had two level-headed leaders, with the United States and the Soviet Union. But now, I mean, you got madmen. Nobody seems to be saying. You think they're that crazy that they would actually push it to the point of a possible third world war with nuclear weapons? I mean, you know what Einstein said about
do you know why Truman dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? It wasn't to end the war with Japan. Japan was already trying to surrender. Truman dropped the nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to prove to the rest of the world we have those weapons and we're psychotic enough to use them. And we need to remember, with all this talk about Iraqi nukes and Iranian nukes and all the rest of it, the United States is still the only nation to actually use nuclear weapons of mass destruction on the civilians of another country. And that's something to keep in mind.
That was a country that couldn't even answer us back. That was a country that was, and now we're dealing with Russia, who's got probably as many, if not more nukes than us, and they're probably in better shape, because I heard a lot of these nukes haven't even been kept up properly, and Putin's done a lot of work in revitalizing his military.
Well, basically, what Putin has done is he has designed Russia's nuclear weapons to evade America's ballistic missile defense system. When we come back from the news, I'll mention this in a little more depth. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, one of the reasons I would like to avoid these wars with Russia and China is because after 12, almost 13 years of war across the globe, U.S. military stockpiles are drawn down. The tanks and aircraft are wearing out. So are the troops. And despite the sales brochures from the military-industrial complex, I seriously doubt we can actually prevail in a conventional war against Russia and or China, which is why we run the risk of a nuclear conflict. Now, the U.S. has invested vast sums of money in a ballistic missile defense system. It was a violation of the ABM Treaty, but they went ahead and did it anyway. Down here in Pearl Harbor, we have this giant floating X-band radar. And it's a $2.5 billion boondoggle, which, as it turns out, isn't all that effective. But none of it is really effective because both Russia and China have developed warheads and upper stages that are maneuverable. And the entire U.S. ballistic missile defense system is built around a doctrine of an incoming threat that is following a predictable ballistic path, where you know where it will be so many seconds ahead of time so that you can put an interceptor there. And China's hypersonic Wave Rider maneuvers, so do the latest generation of Russian warheads. They bob up and down, they corkscrew, they weave back and forth, they dipsy-doodle. And that means ballistic interception is absolutely impossible. The U.S. spends vast sums of money on whiz-bang high-tech weaponry, and inevitably it turns out it can all be obsoleted with very simple approaches. See, in Russia and China, when they spend money for a weapon, the goal is to get a weapon. Here in the U.S., when the government spends money on weapons, it's to fleece money from you and give to their cronies in the defense industries, who then kick back part of the money as very generous campaign donations. And what's rather ironic is, right now we're in the same situation the U.S. was in the years just before World War II, where even before Eisenhower called attention to the military-industrial complex, military procurement was a for-profit operation. And Harry Truman became very popular with the American people for standing up and saying, look at all the money that is going into these defense contracts for which we get nothing of any value back. And that was what made him famous with the American people. Very, very popular. We're in that same situation. We have all these amazing-looking weapons like the F-22 and the F-35 that don't really work. So, anyway, now, another article over here in the originallandofwar.com. Hi, I'm Uncle Sam, and I'm a waraholic, and that is certainly true. And they're talking about how we use the language, the war on drugs, the war on poverty, the war in Afghanistan, war in Iraq, war on terror. And how silly it is to look at every problem as being a war. And it does betray a militant mindset. But behind that, there's a little bit of a legal trick going on. Because when the president declares war on something, it's in order to activate additional power and authority for the president that normally would not be there, would be reserved for Congress. And when we stopped having the Soviet Union to be constantly in a Cold War with, that's when we said war on poverty, war on this, war on nouns, war on dangling participles. Because it is a legal maneuver to give the president authorities he normally would not have in a time of peace. And unfortunately, we've reached a point where war is pretty much the only option this government has left. We've allowed our manufacturing to decline, both in quantity and quality. Much of it's gone overseas. Much of the technology this nation, invented to go to the moon with has been licensed off to foreign countries that are now making fortunes manufacturing the products we should have been making. Wall Street literally got it into their heads that because of the Bretton Woods Agreement, the U.S. could prosper by being bankers to the rest of the world and just getting along on the interest, on the piece of the action of everybody else's commerce, whether it was the Federal Reserve note or following Richard Nixon's ending of gold convertibility, the petrodollar. They really thought that, and now they're stuck because we don't have adequate manufacturing. We have destroyed our agricultural exports with this GMO disaster, and people are turning away from the U.S. dollar because it really doesn't have any value anymore, because you can't bring it back to this country and get quality manufactured goods or healthy, safe agricultural produce. And that's why they're turning to the ruble and the yuan, because they also recognize that as long as they had to come to Wall Street and borrow Federal Reserve notes to conduct their business, that they were under the influence of the U.S. government. U.S. imperialism was built on that piece of ink and paper, and they're turning away. And the United States is out of options. It will take too long to rebuild our manufacturing to have attractive products to bring customers back. It would take a minimum of 3 years if we started burning the GMO crops right now this day. It would take a minimum of 3 years to be able to guarantee to the rest of the world that we're not tainting our food products with GMO any longer. And we certainly don't see the political will to do either of those. The U.S. has been maintaining dollar hegemony through threat of military force, overt and covert. And the rest of the world is beginning to see the U.S. as a paper tiger. Now, true to their word, yesterday Israel intercepted the Freedom Flotilla on its way to Gaza. Nobody was hurt this time. And the Israelis are now escorting the ships to Ashdod. Netanyahu couldn't resist gloating, and he sent a message to the ship saying, "You must have gotten lost. You really meant to go up to Syria because those Syrian people, they need your help." So he's just trying to pour salt in the wound. But they're acknowledging that Israel seized and boarded these ships in international waters. That's a criminal act. It's a violation of treaty. It's an act of piracy is basically what they did. To commandeer peaceful ships engaged in commerce in international waters. We've got the 6th Fleet down there off the coast of Somalia, killing people for that. So, now, just to make up for the fact that they didn't kill anybody on the Freedom Flotilla, apparently the Israelis shot another Gaza fisherman dead. Brave Israeli gunboats. 3 fishermen in a rowboat. They opened fire on them. It's amazing. Now, as you know, representatives of Gaza and the West Bank have filed a formal complaint of war crimes charges with the International Criminal Court. And as a result, not too surprisingly, U.S. backers of Israel are lashing out with threats. We will punish you for bringing war crimes charges against our friends. They're telegraphing to the rest of the world that the U.S. government is a puppet regime ruling on behalf of Israel. They're advertising in flashing neon that they are complicit. They're accessories after the fact with Israel's war crimes. And this is why the world does not see the United States as any kind of a champion of human rights or a moral authority. They see us as having been dragged down to the gutter of thuggism by our government's obeisance to Tel Aviv. Now, Netanyahu was out there at the Genesis Prize Award screaming that the United Nations and especially the Human Rights Commission, they're obviously anti-Semites and they're biased because look how many resolutions the UN has passed against Israel's acts, and it's so much larger than Syria or Libya or Lebanon, and that proves that they're biased. No, actually, the reason Israel has so many resolutions against them for human rights violations is they commit more human rights violations. And Netanyahu, even in this late date, is still out there saying, oh, it's anti-Semites, it's the Jew haters. We didn't do anything wrong. We're the most moral army in the world. Does he really think we're all stupid enough to buy that, to believe that? You ought to be insulted if he actually thinks that. That he can get up there and smile and say it's just the anti-Semites and you're going to believe that? He's treating you like you're all morons and idiots. And I know you are not morons and idiots. We got to take a break for the news. We've got a caller on the line. I'll get to you as soon as we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. We have got a bunch of people waiting on the line, so we're going to go ahead and start taking phone calls. Glenn in Pennsylvania, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. A few different things. First of all, they just mentioned on the news, I was going to point out that the Dow was down 350 points today, and that's almost 2%, 1.95%. But in addition, the Shanghai, mainland China, German and French markets were all down over 3%, with the Nikkei and the Hong Kong markets hard on their heels. So, and tomorrow things don't bode too well for tomorrow, and then eventually, I think Sunday you have the Greek referendum coming up. So this is going to drag on. And it looks like this could, we could really be into a turning phase here on the economy.
Well, yeah, because everybody's sort of been trusting that somehow there would be a solution, that somebody could find that missing 11th marble. And I think there are way too many people in positions of finance and government that are trapped by their own belief systems, and it destroys their ability to objectively analyze what's going on. And by the time they finally wake up to what's going on, it's going to be really too late to do anything about it, I think.
Right, they could be on the verge of panic. The other thing I was going to say from the news on the break is I hope Trump sues the tar out of NBC and wins. Since when are networks the moral arbiters of the society such that they can breach contracts in order to, slap somebody's wrist? This is bizarre and crazy. And from what I can understand, it sounds as though Trump's remarks were misconstrued out of context in the first place.
Well, again, did Trump say this actually on NBC as part of his professional relationship with him? And if not, then he is just as covered by the First Amendment as people who wave the Confederate flag, or Charlie Hebdo, or that girl in Israel who equates Jesus to a monkey and then nails him to a cross. And we've got her video up at whatreallyhappened.com today. First Amendment has to be absolute, or it's not worth the parchment it's written on.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of, television networks and sports, agencies like the NFL and Major League Baseball and stuff, all of a sudden, just because they're large corporate entities, they're the moral arbiters of society, and they're going to tell everybody what they can and should think. It's just getting crazy out there in that regard.
Well, it's that whole political correct movement that we must all conform to whatever it is that's deemed to be politically correct. But the whole idea of the First Amendment is there are going to be people in the country who are politically incorrect, who are in opposition or dissent to what the political system is trying to do. And our right to be politically incorrect is protected by that First Amendment.
Right. And I have one other gratuitous distraction. You said something earlier about a war on nouns and dangling participles. Put me in the mind of linguistically oriented things. Now, you don't make, that many mistakes, grammatically and linguistically on air. Well, however, it is obsolesced rather than obsoleted, because obsolescence is the third form.
All right.
But in the larger context, it's really refreshing to hear someone like Lord Monckton come on, because every day I listen to Chalk Talk Radio and Patriot Radio people lament the dumbed-down nature of the American public, using some of the worst grammar, pronunciation, and syntax known to man. And this includes the commercials. Because, make sure you get some of that artesian bread, Mike, it comes from artesian wells deep in the center of the earth.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of those as well. Funny, when I worked in commercial production all those many years ago in Hollywood, and we would sit around dailies for the final print, we're all just saying, no, this is not how it's pronounced or anything like that. And we were very careful because, we were trying to set a high standard, not just for our company, but for the industry as a whole and for the culture. And ever since Ebonics came along, it's like abandoning the rules of grammar is trendy and fashionable, and that, too, unfortunately, is also something we see inside Common Core, that as long as you're generally able to communicate your needs and wants, that's all that's really necessary.
Yeah, it's nice to hear some of this. It's even among our educated or master's degree people and PhDs and stuff. It's really refreshing to hear some of the higher educated Brits come on who actually, went to schools where some of that stuff that was emphasized in the schools here in the 60s and 70s is still having an effect. But okay, take care. Thank you.
All right,
Bye-bye.
Thank you. We're going to switch over to John in Illinois. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Is this the best talk show host God ever created I'm talking to?
No.
Oh. Okay. Nice.
What's on your mind?
Well, two things. Did you hear this term, I'm privileged belligerent? Have you heard that for what they're going to deem independent journalists now covering war zones?
No, I had. Oh, yes, unprivileged belligerent, meaning they're not protected by the prohibitions against war crimes. In other words, it's open season on anybody who's out there doing their own reporting.
Right. So if you got a blue press helmet and a blue flak jacket and your paycheck doesn't come directly from one of the 6 corporations that own all the Western media, you're unprivileged. So we can shoot at you.
My bulletproof vest is black. I don't have a helmet yet. I suppose I could use my grandfather's World War I helmet, but it's already rather badly dented.
Well, what I thought was interesting, this morning when I was going to work at 9 a.m. Chicago time, it's 5 p.m. in Russia, and the RT News, they didn't lead off with Greece story. They led off with the flotilla being intercepted story, and they ran with that for, a good 13 minutes.
As well they should have. Israel has committed another violation of international law. It's committed an act of piracy on the high seas, and they need to be held to account for it.
Yeah, and the RT said that they had a correspondent in another ship that was trying to catch up with the flotilla, but he didn't make it before they were boarded by the IDF. So that was unfortunate. But what I did call about is, were you able to see the latest episode of HBO's Vice?
Actually, no. The last 3 weeks I have been buried under PHP and SQL and JavaScript and HTML and CSS trying to get the new WhatReallyHappened.com website ready to launch this weekend. And I have not really watched a lot of television outside of the news feed I have here during the show.
Okay, so but you're familiar with the show and the host?
I've heard the name. I really don't know the show. Do enlighten us.
Well, it was about Ukraine and Russia, and what was nice is I had a family member who I've been talking to about with this. He's like, I'm watching this show on Ukraine, and they're being very balanced about it. The interesting thing is, okay, Bill Maher apparently produces the show. I saw that at the ending credits, and then I rolled my eyes. I couldn't believe it, though. This guy who hosts the show, and I don't even know his name, he was given access to Joe Biden. Obama had him alone in a room for an interview to ask him his questions, and Sergei Lavrov. He went to the Kremlin. He was in the halls of the Kremlin filming his show, and then he sat down with Lavrov, and they talked about Ukraine. But you know what? Even though it seemed fair and balanced, and they talked about RT, and they talked about the Western spin, saying Russians' aggression and showing how out of balance that was, there was no mention it was a coup. A NATO or a Western or a U.S.-led coup. There was no mention of that. And I just can't figure out what the hell Bill Maher is pushing, because it's nice that they're saying, hey, we don't want a world war, and hey, this NATO saber-rattling with Russia is probably not a good thing. But at some point, somebody's got to grow a set and say, you know what, the United States and the CIA going around and doing this, deliberately trying to topple Assad, deliberately overthrowing the government of Ukraine and trying to force those people into a civil war against their own people. This is wholeheartedly immoral, and the gavel's got to come down against the United States. And it's like I said, I couldn't. This guy was sitting alone with Obama, letting Obama say his thing. Joe Biden all by himself, and Sergei Lavrov. He wouldn't get to talk to Putin, but I don't know how he gets that kind of access. Can Bill Maher really pick up the phone? Is he really that much of a player?
Well, I think Bill Maher, I need to look at the show. But that being said, it looks to me like the show is in the phase of its life cycle where it's trying to build its credibility and trustworthiness, and then further on down the road, they'll become more overtly propagandistic. Got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back with more phone calls. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go right to the phones here and talk to Damien in New York. Aloha, Damien. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing? Sorry about that. Okay, sorry about that. That might have been off. I'm good. How you doing? I just wanted to say, I don't know if I missed a spot of what you were talking about, but as far as the UN Israel thing, it's hysterical how, again, it's like, what has the United Nations done for Israel? Didn't they decree that being Jewish was a different race of people?
I don't actually recall hearing that. I mean, from Israel's point of view, being Jewish is either a race or a religion depending upon their need at the moment. But there really is no such thing as a Jewish race. They're all basically converts from other people, from the Khazars in Central Asia, Berbers, the descendants of the ancient Hebrews themselves. There really isn't a Jewish gene per se. It's just an attitude, but Jewish. It's a religion. It's a religion that has attained the status of a nation state, not unlike the Vatican, only with nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to let you know I had done some looking and research into Hillary Clinton, and I kind of went down that rabbit hole a little bit this weekend, and it was pretty insane. I could not believe all the stuff that I had found, and I'm looking forward to if you end up taking the time to putting out your piece on Hillary. I'm looking forward to that.
Well, that's next to be done after the launch of the new site, which is, as far as I know, barring something unexpected, the new site will launch this weekend on Independence Day, and we'll be off and running, and everybody will be complaining that it's totally different from the last site, and we'll just have to go through that transition. But yes, as soon as that's up and running, I'm going to be completing the Epic of Clinton mess. To put that out there, because the way things are going with Hillary, she might not even be in the race all that much longer.
Huzzah, huzzah, I hope so. I wanted to say you mentioned Mike Rivero a couple times. Are you familiar? I was a big supporter of his in 2008, and I was one of the volunteers, and he was really shut out by all the major networks, in particular NBC. They just decided to make their own rules as far as who could be in the debates and who couldn't.
Oh, they always have. They always have.
Money they had, Yeah.
You will only consider these money junkie puppets the legitimate candidates. Nobody else. They did it to Ron Paul, and they did it to Mike Rivero.
Yeah.
We had him on the show back when he was running.
Were you familiar with his? Oh, so I guess you were familiar with his National Initiative for Democracy. I was just wondering what your opinion was on that, because he was pushing that as a big part of his campaign.
Well, I would like to see democracy get a little more exposure here in the United States. We've lost all of the democratic controls that were supposed to exist on the government of our republic, and unfortunately, there really isn't any way to reform it. We're going to have to let it run itself out and go down to destruction, and just be ready to build a new country that will serve us and the people, and just be ready to go, so that we don't have a bunch of carpetbaggers coming on in and saying, we'll set up a whole new country for you, just sign your name on the dotted line and pledge your undying loyalty to the private central bank in perpetuity, and we'll get everything going for you and get you some GMO something for lunch.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike, for taking my call. Take care.
All right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. Now, we have this referendum coming up in Greece, one way or the other. The money junkies are out there saying Greece may not have enough money to conduct a referendum by the electronic systems that are open to rigging. They may just get everybody out in a big crowd and say, in favor of leaving the EU, and just take a head count, which is very, very hard to fake. By the vote riggers on that one, maybe a reason for do that. But they are having major demonstrations in front of the Greek Parliament, reiterating that the people of Greece are ready to leave the European Union. They have had it with the predatory behavior of the European Central Bank and the IMF. They want out. They want their country back. Now, the money junkies in Europe and the United States have issued a statement that, as far as they're concerned, even if Greece leaves the European Union, they still expect the debt to be fully repaid. And I'm not sure why they're saying that, other than to possibly have some kind of a tactic to stall the credit default swaps, because Greece's parliament has already ruled that much of the debt is odious because of the fraud committed by Goldman Sachs and Papandreou, and they're not going to pay it. And so what may be going on here is that all these financial firms that sold credit default swaps against Greece's debt, they're looking for some way they can cheat the people who bought those derivatives. But if they do that, it's going to destroy the derivatives market as a whole. And so what's going to think after that is figure out some way to dump the losses on the people, because that's how fascism works. Alrighty, now up in Germany, in Berlin specifically, a spokeswoman for the Israeli embassy in Berlin made a statement to Israeli journalists, which maybe she didn't think was going to be made public, but it was. And this spokeswoman for the Israeli embassy in Berlin told these journalists it was in Israel's interests to maintain German guilt about the Holocaust. And Israel isn't seeking full normalization of relations between the governments because they get more money and political leverage trying to make the German people feel guilty over whatever it is that happened or did not actually happen before they were all born. And one of the journalists, even though Israeli, said, we were in shock. Basically, Israel is saying they deliberately try and maintain feelings of guilt in the German people so they can get money and submarines and stuff from them. Now, let me tell you how I feel about that, and I hope some people in Germany are listening to this and will spread the word. I am not guilty of anything that happened before I was born. I reject that idea. I refuse to accept guilt over any incidents, events that I personally am not able to intervene with or influence. End of story. And here we have the Israeli embassy saying they deliberately try and keep the German people feeling guilty about something that happened before they were all born in order to get money from them. Israel is planning to build a fortified fence along 150 miles of the border with Jordan. Apparently Israel's starting to make stink face at them. They're not happy with going into Lebanon and Syria. Now we're going to go after Jordan. Now, as you know, the U.S. is trying to protect Israel from the United Nations for war crimes charges. The U.S. government has already said they are not going any further with the United Nations Human Rights Council report on what happened in Gaza a year ago. And now they're trying to find some way they can bludgeon Palestine into withdrawing their charges against Israeli authorities at the International Criminal Court, a place where the United States does not have a veto. And maybe the U.S. ought to be thinking about looking a little closer to home, because China is now raising the issue of the United States' human rights abuses. So maybe the next United Nations report is going to be on war crimes committed by America's leaders. There are certainly enough of them. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, if there's one person who's delighted over the Greek economic crisis or the Confederate flag controversy or the controversy over the Supreme Court's gay marriage decision, which they're still going on about at Fox News, it has to be Hillary Rodham Clinton. Because all of a sudden the media is no longer looking at the fact that she did not, in fact, turn over all of her emails to the Congressional Committee looking into Benghazi. Oh, wow, she's off scot-free. Nobody's paying attention to that. Wrong, Hillary. We're going to fill the gap here. We're going to take up the slack here. We're going to be reminding everybody how you lied to the Congress and you lied to the American people about those emails. We're going to be bringing it up on a regular basis for at least the next year and few months. Not too surprisingly, in an effort to keep you from thinking too closely about what may be happening to your savings account in the immediate future, the Department of Homeland Insecurity and the Federal Bureau of Idiots are out there saying there's going to possibly be a 4th of July terror attack. Now, either they know there's going to be one and they should be able to get the guys before they get there, or they're smoking opium and just shouting booga booga to keep you distracted and afraid and mentally dependent on the government to protect you, which they certainly didn't do at Boston and certainly didn't do down in Charleston, did they? Okay, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Andrea in Oklahoma, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, just because you said that Congress does listen, and you've said in the past that if they wanted to, they could buy the Federal Reserve for $1 billion and be done with them, and they could start changing their money system, and just shouldn't they put some space in between Wall Street? No matter what's been happening, they can be rebels, as we well know, and do radical things that we don't like. So can't they do something really radical and no matter how risky it is, because it sounds like they're being blackmailed, and do something for we the people, for the nation that they live in, that they will continue to live in, and they can't escape, no matter where they go in the world, will somehow be able to follow them.
Well, see, the problem is politicians as a class of people, to paraphrase the guy who made Aaron Russo, the guy who made America Freedom to Fascism, he said, politicians will sell their own mother for $1. And that's absolutely true. That is exactly the kind of people who are attracted to positions of political power. And the fact of the matter is that over time, because all the limits on campaign donations and lobbying and the rest have been taken off, Congress is for sale to the highest bidder, and Wall Street is able to outbid the American people. Yes, Congress can rescind the charter of the Federal Reserve anytime they want to, but if they do so, all of that money pouring in from Wall Street to their campaign coffers and various under-the-table reinforcements is going to vanish. It's going to dry up. They're not going to have all this amazing wealth they can make out of being a representative or a senator. They might actually have to go out and get a real job, and that's beneath their dignity.
So, but won't it dry up anyway if we go into deep, deep depression, worse than it ever has been before? Won't they have to experience that also? And the huge lines of people in the streets and everything. I mean, they'll have to live with this too. They can't escape it no matter
No, they don't. They'll take their wealth and they'll fly off to the Caymans or someplace where the depression isn't being felt. See, everybody who's in office today, right now, what they're thinking is, I can find a way to stall the final crash until after I am out of office, and then it's not my fault. I don't get the bad report in the books of history, and I get to retire quietly, and nobody's going to blame me. Everybody in the Congress right now, everybody on Wall Street is convinced they're going to hold off the final collapse until after next year's elections, and then it's somebody else's problem to deal with. They've been kicking this can down the road for so many decades, it doesn't even look like a can anymore. It looks like an old used-up gum wrapper. But that's why the system keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Everybody's only thinking about their own term in office and just saying, if I can just get to the end, if I can hold off the disaster, if I can just duct tape this mess together until somebody else is in this office, they get to eat the verdict of history. And that's another reason why they're not going to address what's wrong until it's way too late.
Well, if Greece goes belly up, and it immediately, everybody wants their money, the derivatives money, all this missing money. I mean, won't it come instantly here, and then they will have to live with the same scenario here? Yeah,
but it means they miscalculated. You know, they're not ready. I mean, you're hearing it in the corporate news. They're out there saying, it's not going to affect us, it's not going to affect us. You know, they're still living in this little fantasy world of denial. They don't understand. Because they never wanted to understand. They never wanted to understand about the 11th marble. They never wanted to understand how it's all just a giant Ponzi scheme, because they're beneficiaries of this system. And like I said, banking isn't a science, it's a religion. And members of Congress are among their most devoted acolytes. They pray to the God of banking every time they sign a new bill, giving the banks more power and authority and wealth. And they're thinking with their own stock portfolios and their own wallet. And I'm sure they all have golden parachutes, and when it all falls apart, they'll just say, oh, well, too bad, and they're going to be gone. And they're going to leave the rest of America to clean up the mess here. And, you know, I think thinking about revenge or anything is kind of a waste of time. We're going to have bigger problems to deal with when it falls apart.
Well, okay, now, I'm in Oklahoma. Is there any way that our state would all of a sudden decide to pull away from the federal government and go independent? I mean, they've got to come up with maybe something else. You had mentioned printing your own money.
Yes.
States printing their own and do trade that way. How would we go about doing that? I mean, rush down to the Capitol and start talking to our representatives and hope that they'll listen?
I think you should. I think every one of the 50 states right now, if their state government is not making contingency plans for an internal state-issued currency to keep their economy running, then they're idiots and fools. Every state government needs to be making these plans right now. I can understand if they don't want to make them public. But they better seriously be looking at how are we going to run this state for the state's citizens when the federal system implodes, as is coming. They've got to be making those plans. I certainly hope they're doing that here in Hawaii, because we're in the middle of a big Pacific Ocean. And if we're not ready to operate as an independent economy, free from mainland control and mainland debt, then after about 3 months, we're going to be eating each other on this rock.
Okay, so are you totally and completely prepared in your little, have all the stocks and everything? Because I don't know how many people are like me, but, I don't have tons of food that's perishable or not perishable.
Well, I don't have as much as I'd like to have, but I'm not going to be into the trash bins after a couple of days, like most people I know around here. Basically the state governments have got to be ready to step in and actually take care of the state people, because, as you yourself said, when it gets to the point where they're going to start eating each other, they're going to start with the bankers and the politicians, because they're very tender and they taste like chicken.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your views.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're coming up here on another commercial break, and then back with the last segment of our program on this very, very crazy Monday, and I think it's only going to get worse for the rest of this week as well. So we're going to take a break here and come back. I got a couple more stories I need to share with you, and here's the commercial. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And not too surprisingly, as the global economy edges closer and closer to the Grand Plongée, the statists, the bankers are trying to figure out some way they can disarm us all, because the money junkies will never sleep soundly in their bed until the general population is made totally helpless and under control. So we're viewing with some alarm this 10th Circuit Court of Appeals ruling that flies right in the face of the Supreme Court rulings in D.C. versus Heller and McDonald versus Chicago. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals said the Second Amendment only protects gun rights inside your own home, that you have no right to keep and bear arms outside your home. You can just have them at home as a collectible, and you can use your guns in your home to protect you. You have a right to protect yourself only in your own home. And it is in defiance of prior Supreme Court decisions, and I'd like to point something out. Those people in that Charleston church were not in their homes. You're telling me they didn't have a right to defend themselves from this bozo with his brain melted on prescription psychiatric drugs? It may be moot anyway, because the Supreme Court's legal justification for their same-sex marriage ruling may have legalized concealed carry of loaded firearms across all 50 states, nullifying gun laws everywhere. The rationale for the Supreme Court to rule that gay marriage is legal in all 50 states is that enough states have legalized it that the rest of the states have to be brought in line under the Equal Protection Clause. So if you get to marry, we get to carry. The Supreme Court has set a precedent saying that those laws, well, basically the Second Amendment is the law of the land. And the Second Amendment says we have a right to protect ourselves. Not just from tyrannical central government, but from drug criminals getting their arms from the Fast and Furious program, and guys like this Dylan Roof, whose brain is melted on prescription psychiatric medication. Because the average wait time for a 911 call in this country is running 21 minutes. Now then, a couple of weeks, we're going to have an amazing scientific achievement as the New Horizons spacecraft whizzes past the, we're not sure if it's a planet or not, Pluto. I was born in an age where Pluto was considered a planet. I was born in an age where all we knew about the planets was what we saw through telescopes. And I have seen all of the planets through telescopes. Pluto, I had to use somebody else's very big telescope. And now, just during my lifetime, all these spacecraft have gone out there. Voyager went to Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and now we're finally getting a spacecraft all the way out to Pluto. It is just stunning to think about. And I'm looking forward to seeing that. I mean, I was born at an age where a lot of people still thought there was a good chance of intelligent life and civilizations on Mars, until Mariner 74 kind of spoiled it for all the science fiction fans here. But here's what's really interesting. Some years ago, the post office put out a series of stamps commemorating, if you will, the planets, and mentioning the spacecraft that had explored them, except, of course, for Pluto, which it hadn't been explored, not yet explored. And to indicate how these people feel, they actually put one of these 29-cent stamps, Pluto not yet explored, on the New Horizons spacecraft. I think that's very cool. And it wasn't trivial. At that distance, the weight of a postage stamp is going to have a significant influence on its orbital path. But I'm glad they did it. I'm glad they put a Lincoln penny on Curiosity. It sort of humanizes the whole thing. Of course, we had the plaque on Pioneer that offended everybody because the man and woman were naked. We had the phonograph record on Voyager that was out there, and one side of the record was all of the languages of Earth saying greetings and selections of music, and the other side actually had still pictures, and they included the playback head and graphic instructions how to recover the data from the record. And several months after Voyager was launched, somebody typed into the teletype system for NASA, message received, send more Chuck Berry. It's been kind of an in-joke all along there. All right, let's see. I'm I keep getting these phone calls from this company that says that unless I pay them a fee, Google search will no longer show my business entity. This is a scam that's been going on for a huge amount of time. I got one last week. Claire got one this morning. It is a known scam. Okay? Google searches, they're starting to bias them, and in fact there's a lawsuit about that going on. But these people who call up and say that if in exchange for your credit card number, they will boost your rankings on Google or make sure Google doesn't ignore you, it is a scam, and it's been going on for like over a year, and the federal government can't be bothered. NSA can't find them. And probably one of the reasons NSA isn't finding criminals and terrorists is, once again, this massive U.S. spy system has been found to be engaging in corporate espionage. They're not looking for criminals, can't get any money off the criminals. They're not looking for terrorists. Everybody knows the terrorists are fake, like Adam Gadon, who supposedly was killed last year, but he's in the newspaper again. And now it's come out, the NSA's spying program was conducting massive economic espionage against France. That's the real issue. Not the fact that NSA was spying on the French presidents, because that sort of goes with the job. But NSA was plundering corporate business secrets from French companies to give the advantage to American companies. France is not happy about that one tiny bit, especially after going along with them regarding those Mistral ships for Russia. Now, it turns out that it has been official U.S. government policy since February of 2010 that when their experts find an exploit anywhere in any computer system, they don't announce it. The private security researchers, when they find that there's an exploit, a weakness, a hole that cyber criminals can get through, they'll make it public so that people can put out a patch. Not the U.S. government. When they find them, they hold them secret in case they need them. And meanwhile, of course, you are left wide open for the real cyber criminals or the NSA workers who are cyber criminals on the weekend. Because after all, the ability to spy on foreign governments is much more important than protecting the American people from crime. Besides which, if you're being victimized by computer crime, then you will buy these identity protection companies and you'll buy this antivirus security stuff for your computer, and that stimulates the economy, even though it's come out that the NSA has backdoored all of the major antivirus computer security providers here in the United States of America. And it just goes on and on and on about that. Now, story out of Investment Watch Blog, and I mentioned this a little while ago. There is an antitrust action being brought against Google because it's been discovered that, yes, it does harm consumers by skewing search results to favor those who pay for them or those who are just buddy-buddy with Google's management. But in point of fact, there have been documented cases where people were directed to harmful products over safe products. And that may result in some legal action. Now, the story here about how the states are fighting to keep towns from offering their own internal broadband. Because if it stays in town, they don't get to spy on you. They want to go back to everything goes through a central server where we can keep an eye on it. And local broadband is a very private broadband. Michelle Obama is extending her school lunch program to daycare centers. So those little tiny preschool babies are going to have the benefit of those same lousy lunches as our school children. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and do Jim Goddard's show. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, please call your local talk radio stations. Point them at gcnlive.com. Tell them to carry our programming. We're trying to stop a war before the mushroom clouds start sprouting all over our backyard. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.